Imagine Northern Ireland scale.
More than 16% of everyday grocery items were unavailable to shoppers across the United Kingdom this morning. According to national retail polling, in multiple cities, shelves showed the same pattern. Not empty stores, but consistent gaps across essentials. 42% of shoppers report walking out without completing purchases when this happens. This is not panic yet. It is repetition, and repetition changes behaviour. The question is simple. How long does this stay manageable before trust finally gives way?
Britain is headed towards civil war, and he advised people living in its large cities to move before the violence starts.
The same data reveals a sharp shift in consumer loyalty. 67% of shoppers say they actively favour stores that maintain stocked shelves, while 58% avoid retailers that repeatedly run out. These numbers reflect a withdrawal of trust. Consumers are no longer adapting to the system, they are judging it. Reliability has become the defining metric.
Britain displays many of the signs of being a failed state, such as economic decline, total loss of trust in the police, and a fractious and increasingly extreme politics.
Not price or branding. Retail Times also highlights a more destabilising behaviour. 42% of shoppers report leaving stores without buying anything when key products are missing. This is not substitution, it is abandonment. Every abandoned trip compounds frustration, amplifies word of mouth, and reinforces the perception that supply is no longer dependable. The economic signal is clear, even if it remains publicly downplayed.
I think there is a widespread consensus in the country that Britain is a nation in decline, economically, demographically, and culturally.
Despite these patterns, expectations remain unchanged. 86% of shoppers still expect core items to be available on every visit. That expectation collides directly with how modern UK supply chains operate. The mismatch is not addressed openly, it is absorbed silently through reduced visibility, altered layouts, and the absence of explanation. The result is confusion rather than clarity. Behind the shelves, structural pressures continue to accumulate. Research from the University of Manchester shows how repeated disruptions have stripped resilience from supermarket logistics. Pandemic panic buying, regional flooding, and distribution centre strikes each eroded buffer capacity. Recovery restored flow but not strength. The system resumed operation thinner, faster, and more exposed to shock. The Institute of Economic Affairs explains the vulnerability plainly. The UK retail sector operates on a just-in-time model that holds only days, sometimes a single week of inventory. Under normal demand, it appears efficient. Under sudden behavioural change, it collapses visibly. Overnight emptiness is not anomalous. It is the expected outcome of a system designed without slack. Labour constraints magnify the effect. Retail Insight DIO reports ongoing shortages in heavy goods vehicle drivers and warehouse staff. National supply may exist, but regional movement falters. When logistics lag even briefly, shelves empty immediately. The consumer does not see upstream availability. They see absence. Absence is interpreted as failure, regardless of explanation. Consumer psychology then accelerates the breakdown. Research cited by RTE confirms that empty shelves generate anxiety independent of actual scarcity. Visual gaps trigger defensive behaviour. Media imagery compounds it. City Research Online shows that images of empty aisles amplify fear and convert perception into demand surges, making shortages real even when they were initially only apparent. Historical precedent reinforces the pattern. Sky News documentation of early COVID toilet paper shortages shows how demand spikes alone sustained strain for weeks without supply collapse. What is happening now follows the same logic. This is not spontaneous chaos. It is a feedback loop created by fragile systems, amplified perception, and institutional silence. Overnight emptiness is the symptom. Trust erosion is the cause. The economic damage begins quietly long before it becomes visible on balance sheets. When shelves remain empty, consumer loyalty erodes faster than pricing power or brand identity. Retail Times data shows that shoppers do not simply adjust expectations. They leave, they switch stores, they break habits built over years. This loss is not temporary. Once trust dissolves, it rarely returns at scale. Retailers facing persistent availability gaps are not losing transactions. They are losing customers. RetailInsight.io quantifies the impact with precision. Poor stock availability contributes to an estimated 8% revenue loss for some retailers. This loss comes from abandoned baskets, incomplete trips, and unmet demand that never converts. These are not marginal figures. In an industry operating on thin margins, 8% represents the difference between stability and contraction. The absence of goods does not delay revenue, it permanently deletes it. Logistics pressure compounds the damage. When shelves empty unexpectedly, retailers are forced into reactive behavior. Emergency restocking, expedited freight, short notice supplier shifts. RetailInsight.io notes that these measures carry premium costs. Transport rates rise, warehousing fees increase over time, accumulates, efficiency collapses under urgency. The same system designed to minimize costs under calm conditions becomes expensive under stress. Large chains absorb these costs unevenly. Independent shops, smaller suppliers, and regional distributors bear disproportionate strain. When mainstream retailers prioritize high-demand items, smaller operators lose access to stock entirely. Vulnerable consumers follow the same pattern. Those without flexibility, transport, or alternative stores face reduced access first. Inequality widens quietly, embedded in logistics decisions rather than policy statements. This imbalance reshapes the retail landscape. Dominant chains consolidate power by securing priority supply, while independents struggle to compete. Choice narrows, resilience weakens. What appears as efficiency is in fact concentration. The system becomes faster but more brittle. When disruption hits again, fewer actors remain capable of absorbing shock. Government and government. Retailer responses have followed a familiar script. During previous crises, supermarkets collectively appealed for moderation. Reuters documented repeated public statements urging calm, assuring the public that supply chains remain secure. These messages emphasized responsibility while avoiding structural disclosure. They were designed to soothe behavior without revealing fragility. The result was temporary compliance, followed by renewed demand surges. Behind the scenes, retailers invested in predictive technology. Research from the University of Manchester highlights experimentation with analytics models designed to forecast shortages and optimize stock movement during disruption. These systems improved reaction time but did not alter underlying constraints. Prediction cannot replace buffer capacity. Algorithms cannot manufacture slack where none exists. Purchase limits returned as a visible control mechanism. During the 2020 pandemic, major chains imposed caps on essential items to slow depletion. Wikipedia documents these measures as effective in dampening extreme behavior, yet limits signal crisis rather than confidence. They reinforce the perception that supply is threatened, even when intended to stabilize distribution. Debate persists over the role of government intervention. Some argue that state coordination is required to stabilize signals, regulate communication, and prevent behavioural cascades. Others insist that private logistics remain best positioned to respond dynamically. What remains unresolved is accountability. When availability fails, responsibility disperses across institutions, leaving no clear owner of the outcome. Public messaging continues to prioritise reassurance over explanation. Statements emphasise national supply without addressing local absence. The gap between macro assurance and micro experience widens. Consumers encounter empty shelves while being told nothing is wrong. This contradiction accelerates distrust faster than any shortage statistic. Societal perspectives diverge sharply. Consumer advocacy groups argue that empty shelves reveal deeper structural fragility within supply chains optimized for cost rather than continuity. They call for investment in resilience, redundancy, and transparency. Their position frames availability as a public good rather than a market variable. Retail analysts counter with realism. According to the Institute of Economic Affairs, maintaining always stocked aisles would require costly buffer inventories that undermine efficiency. Excess stock raises prices. Storage increases waste. Flexibility declines. From this view, consumer expectations are misaligned with economic reality. Reliability carries a price few are willing to pay. Economists add another layer. Panic buying is not framed as irrational. The Institute of Economic Affairs notes that under uncertainty, stockpiling is a rational response to perceived risk. When individuals lack confidence in system continuity, they act to protect personal access. This behavior is not emotional excess, it is adaptive under opacity. Media coverage sits at the center of contention. City Research Online warns that sensational reporting on empty shelves distorts risk perception. Images travel faster than explanations. Headlines amplify fear. Coverage intended to inform can inadvertently accelerate the very behavior it documents. Visibility becomes an accelerant rather than a safeguard. The outcome is a loop. Structural fragility produces visible gaps. Gaps trigger behavioral response. Response overwhelms logistics. Logistic strain reinforces absence. Institutions manage optics to preserve calm. Silence replaces transparency. Trust decays further. What is unfolding is not a retail anomaly, it is a systems problem. Economic pressure, institutional messaging, behavioral psychology, and information control intersect at the shelf level. The empty aisle becomes a data point loaded with meaning far beyond inventory. This moment will not be remembered for missing products. It will be dissected as an example of how efficiency without resilience collapses under pressure, how communication without disclosure erodes confidence, how institutions prioritize narrative stability over operational honesty. The broader consequence is not scarcity, it is skepticism. When people stop believing assurances, behavior hardens, markets lose elasticity, systems lose legitimacy, the shelves will refill. That is inevitable. What remains uncertain is whether trust will follow.